Most women move through the world carrying a secret no one else can see. They feel everything, yet they say nothing. Their silence is not weakness, nor is it resignation. It is an invisible power, an alchemy of restraint that unsettles men and confuses the world. Have you ever wondered why a woman who does not speak her truth out loud can still change the entire atmosphere of a room simply by being there? It is because silence, when woven with depth, becomes a mirror. And when a mirror is placed before the unconscious, it forces everyone else to see what they most fear within themselves. Carl Jung once wrote that, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." The quiet woman embodies this principle. She feels the tremors of shadow and ego, not only within herself, but within others. She does not need to confront directly. Her silence provokes projection. A man standing before her may sense his own insecurities vibrating in her stillness, as if she has uncovered his hidden self without speaking a word. Her lack of verbal reaction compels him to wrestle with the noise of his own mind. But make no mistake, her silence is not emptiness. It is a crucible. She processes emotions that most people flee from. While others drown themselves in constant talking, endless distractions, and the superficial noise of daily life, she retreats inward. She listens to the body's trembling signals, the pulse of intuition, the quiet warnings of instinct. In a world addicted to shouting, the woman who chooses silence becomes terrifying, because she cannot be manipulated by words nor seduced by empty promises. Her discernment comes not from logic alone, but from the depths of what Jung called the anima, the archetypal feminine, that invisible bridge between the conscious and the unconscious realms. Imagine standing before such a woman. You tell her your plans, your justifications, your carefully constructed identity. She only watches. She does not argue. She does not flatter. She does not correct. In her still gaze, you begin to hear the cracks in your own voice. The silence unsettles you because it denies you the validation you crave. And that is her hidden power. She does not feed the ego's hunger. She reflects it back to you until you cannot escape the truth. This is why so many men find themselves both drawn to and unnerved by women who seem to feel everything but say nothing. They want to conquer her, to unravel her. Mystery. Yet the more they try, the more they see themselves. Jung would call this the projection of the shadow, the parts of the psyche we bury, only to see reflected in another. To the man, her silence is not silence at all. It is a riddle. It is the echo of his own unlived life. What would you think if I told you that silence can be more seductive than words, that restraint can wound deeper than rejection? A woman who feels everything yet refuses to justify herself disrupts the game entirely. In modern relationships where so much revolves around texting, constant communication, and oversharing, she becomes a paradox. She withholds the currency everyone else spends recklessly: her attention, her energy, her emotional labor. And in doing so, she becomes rare, untouchable, almost mythic. This archetype is not about suppression. It is not about burying one's truth or living in fear. It is about sovereignty. It is about refusing to explain the fullness of one's intuition to those unprepared to understand it. Silence, then, is not avoidance. It is a boundary. It is the decision to let others reveal themselves in the absence of your reassurance. And while silence may look passive, it is anything but. It is active creation, active selection, active protection of one's inner world. The Stoics knew this as well. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." A woman who masters silence dyes her soul with discipline. She feels storms pass through her, yet she does not always externalize them. She recognizes that not every truth deserves an audience, not every battle deserves her energy. By holding back, she cultivates an energy so rare that it cannot be faked. And here lies the paradox. The more she refrains from speaking, the more others speak about her. Rumors, fantasies, projections swirl around her presence because the unconscious cannot tolerate a void. People rush to fill the silence with their own stories. But she knows the secret. The stories others invent about her say far more about them than about her. This is not detachment born of arrogance. It is wisdom born of depth. You see, silence is not the absence of voice. It is the mastery of timing. It is the ability to wait until the word carries the weight of destiny rather than the noise of impulse. And in a world terrified of being misunderstood, the woman who can sit in silence becomes the rarest archetype of all. The oracle, the mirror, the storm, contained. Her silence unsettles because it cannot be controlled. In a culture obsessed with constant affirmation, instant replies, and endless confessions, the woman who withholds becomes a force of defiance. Men often mistake her quiet for softness, imagining they can draw her out with persistence or charm. But silence is not weakness. It is steel tempered in fire. It is the strength of someone who has confronted her own storms in solitude and emerged without needing applause. She does not answer every provocation because she has learned that silence itself can be the sharpest blade. Jung described the anima as the hidden feminine image within the male unconscious, and the animus as the masculine counterpart within the female psyche. When a man encounters a woman who feels deeply but speaks little, his anima awakens. He projects onto her not just desire, but fear. Fear of being seen for who he truly is, stripped of the masks he wears. Her stillness becomes a stage upon which his psyche performs. He tells himself she must be judging, rejecting, admiring, or plotting. In truth, she may simply be holding space, yet his own unconscious cannot tolerate the void. Silence activates projection, like fire ignites shadow. This is why such women often carry an aura of mystery. They are not mysterious because they hide, they are mysterious because others cannot stop revealing themselves in their presence. The man, uncertain of her thoughts, begins to over-explain, to justify, to confess. He spills what he had never intended to say, driven by the discomfort of not being able to read her. She becomes the confessional he never sought but secretly needed. But silence is not only about others, it is about herself. To feel everything but say nothing means to transmute emotion rather than discharge it recklessly. Trauma psychologists remind us that unprocessed emotion seeks release through impulsive expression, often in destructive ways. The woman who has walked through her own suffering learns the alchemy of containment. She does not deny her feelings, but she does not hand them carelessly to those unworthy of holding them. This restraint is not repression, it is sovereignty over the sacred. You may have noticed how modern culture glorifies the loud, the outspoken, the constantly visible. But the archetype of the silent woman resists this compulsion. She embodies what Seneca warned: we suffer more in imagination than in reality. By refusing to voice every flicker of pain, she denies suffering the oxygen of dramatization. Her silence is not self-erasure. It is rebellion against a world that thrives on overexposure. She keeps her power within, guarded like fire in a temple, only releasing it when the moment truly calls. To you who hear this, consider how often you betray your own depths with careless words. How many times have you spoken to soothe another, only to feel empty after? How many times have you explained yourself, hoping for understanding, and found only more misunderstanding? The silent woman does not play this game. She knows that explanation often dilutes truth and that what is most valuable cannot always be spoken. This unnerves men who are accustomed to control. A man may rage at her silence, trying to draw from her a reaction that validates his sense of dominance. But the more he demands, the more her stillness unmasks his own fragility. Jung wrote of individuation. the process of becoming whole by integrating shadow, ego, and unconscious. The silent woman has begun this journey. She recognizes that validation from another cannot complete her. Instead, she builds wholeness in solitude, listening to the language of her body, the murmur of dreams, the wisdom of the unspoken. Do you see the paradox now? Her silence is not absence, but presence. It is heavy, undeniable, like the weight of the moon on the tides. Even without speaking, she shapes the behavior of those around her. Men feel both drawn and threatened. Women both admire and envy. Society both reveres and dismisses. Yet she does not waver, because her power does not depend on perception. It is rooted in the invisible kingdom of her inner world. The Stoic Epictetus once declared, "We have 2 ears and 1 mouth so that we can listen twice as much as we speak." The woman who feels everything but says nothing understands this intuitively. She listens, to others, to herself, to the quiet wisdom beneath the noise of thought. And in listening, she becomes what so few dare to be, a witness to reality without distortion. Her silence is not forever. When she does choose to speak, her words strike like lightning, rare but unforgettable. They carry the weight of all that was held back, the distilled essence of truth rather than the scattered fragments of impulse. In that moment, her power becomes undeniable, because it is born not from reaction, but from mastery. And mastery cannot be faked. There is a strange gravity in the presence of a woman who does not scatter her feelings in every direction. Her quiet gathers energy the way still waters reflect the entire sky. To feel everything and yet remain silent is to cultivate a reservoir of strength that unsettles the shallow and comforts the wise. In Jungian terms, she embodies the tension of opposites, the inner battle between expression and restraint, chaos and order, vulnerability and control. Where others rush to resolve that tension by spilling their emotions outward, she endures it. And, in that endurance, she transforms it into power. Men sense this instinctively. They may not have the words for it, but they feel the weight of her silence pressing against their restless egos. A man used to dominance may interpret her stillness as rejection, while another may mistake it for consent. Both are wrong, for her silence is not about them at all. It is about her relationship with herself. She does not speak to soothe insecurities, nor does she protest to correct misjudgment. She has learned that one of the most dangerous forms of dependency is the need to be constantly understood, and by releasing that need, she walks free of invisible chains that bind so many. This freedom terrifies, because when you no longer depend on others to validate your feelings, you become ungovernable. Jung warned that people resist self-knowledge because it threatens the structures they rely on. The silent woman carries that threat. By refusing to vocalize every thought, she exposes how dependent the world has become on endless reassurance. She breaks the unwritten contract of codependency. She will not bleed herself out in explanations. She will not soften truth with oversharing. And so others must face the silence within themselves, which is the very thing they have tried hardest to avoid. What happens then when such a woman loves? When she opens her depths not through words but through presence. Love for her is not a performance. It is a quiet force that cannot be demanded, cannot be manipulated. A man may misinterpret her lack of constant verbal affirmation as distance, yet in truth, her love is more steady than any loud declaration. She does not repeat "I love you" 100 times a day, because she knows that love is not in the repetition of phrases but in the unwavering current beneath them. She lives love as Jung described wholeness, as something that simply is, beyond all need for proof. And when such a woman withdraws her love, she does so silently. No scenes, no dramatics, no long explanations. She simply stops giving energy, and the absence speaks louder than any argument. That silence becomes unbearable, because it is not just a lack of words, it is the removal of the mirror in which others saw themselves. Without her, they are forced to confront the emptiness they had been covering with her presence. You, listening now, must ask yourself, what does it mean to hold your silence as power rather than punishment? Too often, silence is misused, weaponized as avoidance or passive aggression. But the woman who feels everything and says nothing is not escaping. She is transmuting. She sits with discomfort long enough to let it reveal its lesson. She waits until the emotion crystallizes into wisdom before choosing whether or not to release it. That kind of silence is not cruelty. It is discipline. The Stoics knew this path well. Marcus Aurelius taught, "If it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it." How few live by this today. Yet the silent woman does. She filters her words through the sieve of necessity and truth. If speaking will not serve, she does not, and so her voice, though rare, carries a gravity that others cannot replicate. It is why people remember her sentences years later, long after the chatter of others has faded. Her silence also shields her from a world quick to consume vulnerability for entertainment. In an age of oversharing, her refusal to expose every wound becomes a sacred act of self-protection. She understands that not every tear deserves an audience, not every story must be told to be real. By keeping parts of herself unspoken, she preserves mystery in an era that seeks to devour and dissect. And mystery, Jung reminds us, is the birthplace of archetype, the fertile soil where transformation begins. Watch closely. When she finally does speak, the room falls silent. Not because her voice is loud, but because it is rare. The scarcity of her words gives them value. Like gold, they are precious precisely because they are not scattered freely. Those who listen realize that every syllable has passed through the fire of discernment before being released. And in that moment, her invisible power becomes visible, yet only to those who can recognize its weight. There comes a point when her silence ceases to be seen as absence and is finally recognized as presence in its purest form. To feel everything but say nothing is to live with an intimacy that cannot be reduced to noise. It is to inhabit the space between sensation and speech, the liminal zone where truth is born. Jung would describe this as the dialogue between the conscious and the unconscious, where every unspoken feeling becomes a symbol, every withheld word a doorway into the archetypal realm. She does not rush to close those doors. She allows them to remain open, and in doing so, she becomes the keeper of mystery. For the man who encounters her, this mystery is both intoxicating and maddening. He senses the vast ocean within her but cannot map it with language. He feels her energy shifting the atmosphere of the relationship, yet cannot tether it with demands. This is where his shadow rises. Anger, insecurity, even desperation surface when faced with what cannot be controlled. Her silence forces him to reckon with his own dependence on being understood, his craving for validation, his inability to sit with uncertainty. She does not expose these flaws directly. She simply holds them in the mirror of her stillness. And yet, beneath this unsettling aura, her silence carries compassion. To feel everything means she has absorbed countless storms, her own and those of others. She knows the taste of unspoken pain, the ache of misrecognition, the invisible wounds of neglect. Trauma researchers remind us that silence is often the language of survival. Children who learned early that their words carried no weight or brought only punishment grew into adults who built fortresses of quiet around themselves. But the empowered woman takes this survival mechanism and transmutes it. What began as necessity becomes choice. What once was fear becomes discernment. Her silence is no longer imposed from the outside. It is chosen from within. And so, in relationships, she does not beg to be heard. She does not scream her worth into deaf ears. Instead, she waits in silence, observing who has the courage to see beyond the veil of words. She knows that the right man will not be frightened by her quiet, but fascinated by it. He will not demand constant reassurance, for he too has made peace with his own shadows. Such a man recognizes that silence does not mean absence. It means depth. And when silence meets silence, two oceans merge. But what of the world that misreads her? The colleagues who call her distant, the friends who think her detached, the men who brand her cold. This is the price of sovereignty. To remain whole, she accepts being misunderstood. She recognizes what Jung insisted. Individuation demands separation from the collective, a willingness to walk alone into the depths of the psyche. Her silence, then, is not only relational but existential. It is her way of claiming her journey without needing the approval of the crowd. You must ask yourself, how many times have you betrayed your inner voice just to be heard by others? How many times have you traded authenticity for belonging, truth for comfort, depth for surface? The silent woman refuses these bargains. She does not explain to those who cannot understand, does not defend herself to those who have already judged. In silence, she chooses dignity over desperation, self-respect over performance. And while the world may not always grasp her, she is at peace with the paradox. The Stoics would call this apatheia, not indifference but freedom from unnecessary disturbance. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." She lives this truth. By not scattering her feelings in endless words, she denies the world the power to shape her inner state. She feels deeply, yes, but her feelings do not control her, nor are they tossed carelessly into the winds of opinion. She keeps her sanctuary intact. And when she does choose to break the silence, her words do not merely inform, they transform. A single sentence can disarm, heal, or shatter illusions, because it emerges not from impulse but from integration. It carries the weight of her entire interior life distilled into clarity. Those who hear it cannot forget it, for it is the kind of truth that pierces through noise and lands directly in the soul. This is the invisible power of the woman who feels everything but says nothing. She holds the storm within her, yet presents the stillness of a clear sky. She does not silence herself because she is weak, but because she is strong enough to endure the vastness of what she feels without drowning others in it. And this strength, unseen, unspoken, but undeniable, becomes her shield, her weapon, her crown. Her silence is not a prison, but a threshold. It is the place where old selves dissolve and new selves emerge. To feel everything yet remain wordless is to stand at the edge of transformation, to allow the psyche to reorganize without prematurely naming what is still becoming. Jung insisted that individuation, the process of becoming whole, cannot be rushed. It is not achieved through constant declarations, but through the slow integration of what has been hidden. The silent woman understands this. She does not interrupt her own evolution by narrating it to the world. She lets it gestate in the dark until it rises fully formed, undeniable, unstoppable. This is why she often appears untouchable, not because she rejects connection, but because she does not cling to it for survival. Her worth is not built on being constantly affirmed, nor her identity shaped by others' perceptions. She has endured the terror of being alone with herself and discovered that solitude did not destroy her. It rebuilt her. She has seen the shadows within, faced the chaos without, and emerged carrying the quiet strength of one who no longer fears emptiness. Her silence is proof that she has been there, to the depths, and returned whole. Men sense this wholeness as both allure and danger. The man who lives in fragments, who has not faced his own unconscious, will feel exposed in her presence. Her calm becomes a contrast to his chaos. Her restraint highlights his compulsions. Her silence magnifies his noise. He may try to control her, to provoke her into reaction, to make her speak so that he can reestablish his dominance. But the more he pushes, the clearer the truth becomes. He is the one enslaved by his need for validation, while she has been free all along. This does not mean she is cold. On the contrary, she feels more deeply than most. But depth teaches discernment. She no longer wastes her tenderness on those who cannot hold it, nor her loyalty on those who betray it. To feel everything but speak nothing is to test the world. Who is capable of perceiving without constant explanation? Who is mature enough to sit with her quiet and still sense her love? For only those who have faced their own shadows can withstand the mirror of her stillness. Psychologists remind us that unprocessed trauma often creates cycles of over-explaining, of desperate attempts to be understood. But healing reverses the cycle. The healed woman no longer pleads for recognition. She recognizes herself. She no longer shouts into voids. She no longer bleeds for those who will not even hold out their hands. Silence, for her, is not suppression but liberation. It is the language of someone who has finally broken free from needing to be heard in order to exist. And what does such a woman look like in everyday life? She is the one who sits in a crowded room and shifts the atmosphere without speaking. She is the one who watches chaos unfold but does not rush to intervene, because she knows that not every storm requires her energy. She is the one who walks away quietly from those who do not honor her, leaving behind only the echo of her absence. And in that absence, others finally realize the magnitude of her presence. You who listen to this must ask yourself, how much of your power have you surrendered in the name of being understood? How many times have you diluted your truth for ears unprepared to receive it? Silence is not about withholding. It is about preserving. It is about recognizing that some truths are too sacred to be handed to those who would trample them. When you learn to guard your silence, you are not withholding love. You are protecting its sanctity. The Stoics spoke of tranquility as the highest state of strength. Seneca wrote, "He who is brave is free." And bravery is not always loud. Sometimes it is the courage to remain still while the world clamors for your reaction. Sometimes it is the audacity to walk away without explaining, to feel the grief without collapsing into noise, to love without needing to broadcast it. That kind of bravery creates an energy that cannot be broken, because it does not depend on anything external to exist. Her silence, then, becomes her crown. It is what allows her to choose rather than chase, to respond rather than react, to hold her ground without the need to prove it. And in this silence she discovers her rebirth, not as a woman defined by what she withholds, but as a woman defined by what she protects. For her silence is not emptiness. It is the sacred space where her soul remains whole. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase. She chooses.